What if I told you that there was a UFC fighter who had all the talent in the world, but physically couldn't take a clean punch? From his towering frame and crisp boxing to his dominant early run in the UFC, James Vick looked like a future title contender. At 6 feet 3 inches, he had a massive reach advantage over most lightweights, and for a while, it seemed like he had the perfect formula for success. But then, everything changed. A brutal knockout loss exposed a fatal flaw in his game, his chin, and once the world saw it, his downfall became inevitable. In just a few fights, Vick went from being one of the most promising contenders in the division to completely out of the UFC. But how did it all go so wrong? And is a weak chin something that a fighter can ever truly fix? Well, to find out, we have to go back to where it all started. James Vick wasn't supposed to be a UFC fighter. Born in Mineral Wells, Texas, he grew up playing football and wrestling, but he wasn't a standout athlete. He was just another kid in a small town.
I didn't come from a big gym or a big background. I just worked hard and believed in myself.
After high school, he picked up boxing and quickly realized he had a natural talent for striking. That led him to MMA, where his size and reach made him a nightmare for opponents. Before long, he earned a spot on season 15 of The Ultimate Fighter, his first real shot at the big leagues. And while he didn't win the show, he made a strong enough impression to earn a UFC contract. That's when things really started to take off. James Vick entered the UFC in 2013, and right away he looked special. He was tall, had slick hands, and most importantly, he knew how to use his reach. He wasn't just surviving in the UFC, he was thriving. Between 2013 and 2018, he went 9-1, beating solid veterans and building a reputation as a dark horse in the lightweight division.
Vick had one of the longest reaches in the division. If he stayed on the outside, he was a nightmare to deal with.
And for a while, it worked. He picked apart guys with his boxing, controlled range, and seemed to be climbing toward title contention. But there was one problem, and it was about to be exposed. August 25, 2018. James Vick versus Justin Gaethje, his first UFC main event. This was his chance to prove he was elite, and leading up to the fight, he was confident, maybe a little too confident.
Gaethje's a Homer Simpson. He just takes damage. I'm gonna put him to sleep.
One punch, that's all it took. Just one clean right hand from Gaethje. And Vick was completely unconscious. And here's the thing, this wasn't just another loss. This was a turning point, because from this moment on, James Vick was never the same. After Gaethje, Vick stepped back into the octagon looking for redemption, but instead, things got worse. Dan Hooker knocked him out. Paul Felder put a beating on him. And then came the worst one, Nico Price, an upkick. That's when it was over. Just 2 years after looking like a future contender, James Vick had lost 4 straight fights, 3 by brutal knockout, and the UFC made their decision. In 2019, James Vick was released from the UFC. Just like that, his run was over. So what happened? Why did Vick suddenly go from contender to getting knocked out every fight? The answer? Durability. Once a fighter suffers a few bad KOs, their ability to absorb damage starts to decline. The brain becomes more vulnerable to trauma, and knockouts become more frequent.
We've seen it in boxing MMA. It's called a glass chin. Once it starts, it's almost impossible to reverse.
Every time a fighter takes a clean shot to the chin, their brain is rattled inside the skull. The impact can cause microtrauma to the neurons, making it harder for the brain to recover. Over time, the body's ability to handle damage weakens, and what would have once been a glancing blow can now put a fighter's lights out. Once a fighter has been knocked out multiple times, their nervous system becomes hypersensitive to trauma. This is why we often see fighters who were once durable suddenly become fragile. This isn't unique to James Vick. Some of the greatest fighters of all time have experienced the same decline. Look at Chuck Liddell, once one of the toughest guys in the sport. But after a few brutal knockouts, he couldn't take a clean shot anymore. Same with Cody Garbrandt, once a champion, now getting dropped by shots he used to walk through.
I started to feel like I was second-guessing everything. I used to be able to take a punch and keep going. But after a while, it was like I knew if I got hit clean, it was over.
Studies on combat athletes have shown that the more knockouts a fighter suffers, the greater their risk of long-term neurological issues. Chronic traumatic encephalopathy, or CTE, has been linked to repeated brain trauma in fighters and football players alike. So can a fighter recover from this? Can a weak chin be reversed? The short answer is not really. Fighters can try to improve their defense, strengthen their neck muscles, and change their fighting style. But once a chin is gone, it's gone. Some fighters extend their careers by adapting. Floyd Mayweather, for example, built his legacy on defense and head movement, avoiding unnecessary damage. But for guys like Vick, who relied on their length and striking, it's hard to completely change their style overnight. So what happens after the fighting stops? When the lights fade and the roar of the crowd is gone, how does a fighter like James Vick move forward? For many fighters, the end of a UFC career can be a harsh reality check. Some transition into coaching, others try their hand at commentary, while some struggle to find direction outside the cage.
When you fight your whole life and then suddenly it's over, you have to find something else that gives you purpose. That's the hardest part.
For Vick, coaching seemed like the natural next step. With years of experience inside the cage, he turned his focus to training the next generation of fighters, passing on knowledge, helping young prospects avoid the same mistakes he made. But like many retired fighters, he also had to deal with the physical toll of his career. Years of fighting, training, and knockouts leave a mark. Chronic injuries, concussion symptoms, and lingering damage are realities that fighters often don't talk about. CTE, brain trauma, and post-fight health issues have been major concerns in MMA. While some fighters escape relatively unscathed, others deal with long-term repercussions that affect their daily lives. Some fighters, like Spencer Fisher, have publicly shared their struggles with memory loss, depression, and neurological issues. While there's still much research to be done, one thing is clear: fighting at the highest level comes at a cost.
I've had my fair share of injuries, but I try to stay positive. I stay active, I train guys, and I focus on what's next. You can't dwell on the past.
Outside of coaching, Vick has explored other opportunities, from running his own gym to engaging in business ventures. Like many ex-fighters, finding stability outside the cage has been a journey in itself. Now we want to hear from you. Do you think fighters with weak chins can ever succeed at the highest level? Or is it a death sentence in MMA? Let us know in the comments below.